Welcome back to my channel. So it looks like that so-called redemption story for Cody Brown and Robyn Brown? Yeah, that's not happening anytime soon. Not with Maddie Brown brush stepping in and completely flipping the narrative upside down. Because right now, the Brown family has clearly reached a breaking point. The filters are gone. The forced smiles? Gone. And that whole everything is fine act they've been trying to maintain for years? Completely shattered. What we're seeing now is something very different, raw, unfiltered truth. And honestly, that shift is hitting Cody and Robyn harder than anything we've seen before. For the longest time, Cody and Robyn have been trying to control the story. They've painted this picture of new beginnings, especially when it comes to their massive house upgrade. According to them, it's all about fresh starts, stability, and creating a better future. Sounds nice, right? Almost believable. Until Maddie stepped in and called it out for exactly what she thinks it is. And she didn't hold back. Not even a little. In Maddie's eyes, this isn't some misunderstood couple trying to rebuild their lives. No, she's making it very clear that she sees something completely different, patterns of manipulation, contradictions, and behavior that doesn't match the story being sold on screen. And when that kind of criticism comes from within the family, it hits on a whole different level. This isn't random internet drama. This isn't gossip. This is one of Cody's own daughters speaking publicly, and that changes everything. Because when someone that close to the situation starts speaking out, it doesn't just create noise, it shakes credibility. And let's talk about timing for a second, because this is where it gets even more intense. Right before a new episode of Sister Wives was set to air, an episode where Cody and Robyn were once again explaining their decisions and justifying their choices, Maddie went online and completely disrupted that narrative. No hints. No vague messages. Just direct, bold statements. At one point, she essentially made it clear that whenever Robyn speaks, she doesn't trust what's being said. And just like that, everything changed. Because that wasn't subtle shade, that was a direct hit. But she didn't stop there. Maddie even turned her attention toward her father, and what she said carried weight. Real weight. The kind that doesn't come from anger alone, but from years of built-up frustration finally reaching the surface. And that's why this moment feels so different. Because Maddie has never really been the loudest voice in the room. She wasn't constantly in the middle of the drama. She stayed relatively quiet compared to others. So now that she's speaking up like this, it doesn't feel like attention-seeking. It feels like a breaking point. And the fact that all of this happened just before Cody and Robyn were about to present their polished version of events on national television, that's not just coincidence, that's impact. You can almost imagine the tension behind the scenes. While one side is preparing a carefully framed story, the other is tearing it down in real time. And now, viewers are stuck between two completely different versions of the truth. So while Maddie Brown Brush was out here shaking the internet with her unfiltered truth, Sister Wives was doing the exact opposite, trying to carefully guide the narrative in a much softer direction. And honestly, the contrast couldn't have been more obvious. Because right around the same time Maddie's posts started gaining attention, TLC dropped a brand new teaser for the upcoming episode. And if you've been watching the show for years, you already know the vibe. It was the same polished storytelling, the same calm explanations, and the same attempt to make everything sound reasonable, even when it clearly isn't. In that preview, Cody Brown and Robyn Brown sat down and started listing all the reasons why they need a bigger house. According to them, it's all about convenience, being closer to school, closer to church, closer to daily life. On the surface, it sounds practical, logical, even. But here's the thing, fans weren't buying it. Not even a little. Because this isn't the first time we've heard this kind of explanation. Every major decision, every big move, every so-called fresh start has always come wrapped in the same language: family, unity, growth. But somehow, it always ends the same way: more space, more money, and more distance from the rest of the family. And viewers have started to notice that pattern. It's like every time there's a shift, it's presented as something noble, when in reality, it feels more like a strategic move. Something designed to look like it benefits everyone, even when it clearly doesn't. That's why Maddie's timing hit so hard. Because while Cody and Robyn were preparing to show the world their carefully crafted version of events, Maddie had already stepped in and exposed what she believes is the truth behind it. It's almost like she called them out before they even had the chance to speak. And fans? They noticed immediately. Social media lit up with reactions. People were pointing out how perfectly her statements lined up with the teaser, almost like she knew exactly what was coming. Some even said it felt intentional, as if she wanted viewers to watch that episode with a completely different perspective. Instead of seeing a couple trying to rebuild their lives, people started questioning the real motive behind it all. Because when you strip away the emotional language, the situation starts to look very different. This doesn't feel like a family trying to come together. It feels like two people trying to reshape how they're seen. And that's a big difference. Cody and Robyn keep talking about creating a space for everyone, a place where the family can reconnect. But at the same time, the actual relationships within that family seem more fractured than ever. So the question becomes, who is this new beginning really for? Is it truly about bringing everyone back together? Or is it about building something that looks like unity from the outside, even if the reality tells a completely different story? Now let's talk about the part that really exposes everything, because this is where Cody Brown starts telling his version of the story, and if you've been watching closely, you already know how this goes. In the teaser for Sister Wives, Cody sits there calm, reflective, almost like he's trying to present himself as someone who's learned from the past. He starts talking about the future, saying he sees something good ahead, that this new house represents a fresh start, a new chapter, a place where his kids can come back and reconnect. On the surface, it sounds hopeful, almost emotional, like a father trying to rebuild what was lost. But if you followed this family for years, you start to hear something deeper beneath those words. Because this isn't new behavior. This is a pattern. Every time something in Cody's life falls apart, he doesn't sit in it, he repackages it. When relationships break down, it becomes growth. When the family drifts apart, it becomes a reset. And now, with so many of his children distant from him, suddenly it's about creating a home where they can all return. It sounds nice, but it doesn't match reality. Because let's be honest for a second. This is the same man whose relationships with many of his kids have been strained for years. Distance didn't just happen overnight, it was built over time, through actions, decisions, and priorities that didn't always include them. So when Cody starts talking about building a space for his children, people aren't just listening to what he's saying, they're remembering everything that's already happened. And that's where the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. He even goes on to describe this idea of having a place where his kids can come, visit, spend time together again. He frames it like an opportunity, a chance to rebuild those connections. But here's the problem. You can't rebuild relationships with walls and square footage. You rebuild them with effort, consistency, and accountability. And those are the parts people feel have been missing. So when Cody presents this house as the solution, it doesn't come across as genuine to a lot of viewers. It feels more like an image, something that looks like healing without actually addressing what caused the damage in the first place. And that's exactly why Maddie Brown Brush speaking out hits so differently. Because while Cody is on-screen talking about hope, fresh starts, and family reunions, one of his own daughters is essentially saying, that's not the truth. And that creates a powerful contrast. On one side, you have a carefully delivered narrative, calm, emotional, and polished for television. On the other side, you have raw honesty, unfiltered, direct, and coming from someone who actually lived through it. And when those two versions collide, viewers are left asking a very important question. Is this really about rebuilding a family? Or is it about rebuilding an image? Now here's the moment that really made people stop and think, because this is where Cody Brown unintentionally revealed more than he probably meant to. At one point in the teaser for Sister Wives, Cody says something that, at first, sounds emotional, almost vulnerable. He talks about wanting a space where his kids can come back, reconnect, and spend time together again. But then he adds something that completely changes the meaning. He basically admits that even if it's just a fantasy, he still wants to believe it could happen. And that one word, fantasy, says everything. Because that's not a man describing a real, active plan to rebuild relationships. That's someone imagining a version of life that doesn't currently exist. A version where all the damage, all the distance, and all the broken connections somehow fix themselves just because there's a new house involved. And that's where viewers really started to question things. Because calling it a fantasy means, deep down, even Cody knows this isn't grounded in reality. He knows those relationships aren't magically going to heal overnight. He knows the situation with his kids is more complicated than just offering them a place to visit. But instead of addressing that complexity directly, he leans into the idea of hope without accountability. And that's a big difference. Hope without action doesn't rebuild anything. It just creates the illusion that something is being done. And that's exactly how this moment came across to a lot of people. Not as a genuine attempt to fix things, but as a way to look like he's trying. Because let's be real, there's a difference between wanting reconciliation and wanting redemption. Reconciliation requires effort. It requires uncomfortable conversations, ownership of past mistakes, and consistent change. Redemption, on the other hand, is more about perception. It's about being seen as someone who tried, someone who cared, someone who meant well. And right now, it feels like Cody is leaning more toward that second option. He's not just talking about rebuilding relationships, he's framing himself as the kind of father who would rebuild them, if given the chance. And that's where Maddie Brown Brush's voice becomes so important in all of this. Because while Cody is describing this fantasy version of family unity, Maddie is out here grounding the conversation in reality. She's reminding everyone that these relationships didn't just fade away, they were affected by real actions, real decisions, and real consequences. And you can feel that contrast getting stronger with every new statement. On one side, there's this carefully worded vision of what could be. On the other, there's a lived experience of what actually is. And when those two collide, it becomes harder and harder for viewers to ignore the gap between them. Because at the end of the day, a house can be built in months. But trust? That takes years, and sometimes it doesn't come back at all. And this is exactly where everything reaches a boiling point, because while Cody Brown is out here talking about fantasy, reunions, and emotional fresh starts, Maddie Brown Brush decides she's had enough, and she goes all in. No filters. No vague hints. Just straight-up honesty. She takes to social media and completely dismantles the narrative that Cody and Robyn Brown have been trying to build. And what makes it hit even harder is how direct she is. There's no attempt to soften the message, no effort to protect anyone's image. Because at this point, for Maddie, it's not about keeping the peace anymore, it's about telling the truth. And the truth, according to her, is simple. The story being presented on Sister Wives doesn't match what's actually been happening behind the scenes. She calls out the idea that this new house is somehow about bringing the family together. From her perspective, that explanation doesn't just fall flat, it feels insulting. Because let's be honest, the family she's talking about? That connection has already been broken for a long time. So when Cody and Robyn sit in front of cameras talking about creating space for everyone, people like Maddie aren't seeing hope, they're seeing contradiction. And that's what sparked such a strong reaction. She made it very clear that she doesn't believe the narrative being pushed. In fact, she went as far as questioning the credibility of what's being said altogether. And coming from someone who lived inside that family dynamic, that kind of statement carries serious weight. This isn't speculation. This is perspective from the inside. And viewers felt that. Because for years, fans have watched the ups and downs, the conflicts, the distance growing between Cody and many of his children. They've seen relationships change, priorities shift, and dynamics completely fall apart. So when Maddie speaks up and confirms what many people have already suspected, it hits differently. It validates those doubts. And suddenly, the story being told on screen doesn't feel as solid anymore. It starts to look like something else entirely, something carefully shaped, edited, and presented in a way that protects certain people while leaving out uncomfortable truths. And that's where the frustration comes in. Because viewers aren't new to this. They've been watching this family for years. They know the history. They remember the moments that led to this point. So when they're asked to believe that everything can be fixed with a bigger house and a fresh start, it doesn't land the way it used to. And Maddie knows that. That's why she didn't hold back. Because in her eyes, this isn't just a storyline anymore. It's a version of events that ignores everything that actually happened. And by speaking out the way she did, she didn't just challenge Cody and Robyn. She challenged the entire narrative. Now, let's talk about the part that really made viewers uncomfortable, because this is where Cody Brown took things in a direction that a lot of people felt crossed a serious line. During his emotional explanation about wanting a fresh start and building a new home, he brings up his late son, Garrison Brown. And the moment that happens, everything shifts. Because instead of feeling like a genuine reflection of grief, it came across to many viewers as something else entirely. Something strategic. And that's where the backlash really started building. Let's be clear, grief is complicated. There's no right or wrong way to process loss. But what people struggled with here wasn't the emotion, it was the timing and the context. Because Garrison was never part of that home Cody is now talking about. He wasn't included in that version of family life that's being presented on screen. In fact, like many of his siblings, there had been distance for quite some time. So when Cody suddenly brings his name into this new beginning narrative, it didn't feel like remembrance to many viewers. It felt like revision. Like the past was being reshaped to fit the present story. And that's a very different thing. People started asking a difficult question. Is this about honoring Garrison's memory, or is it about strengthening the emotional impact of the storyline? Because when you place something that's serious into a narrative about buying a bigger house, it changes how everything is perceived. Instead of focusing on healing, it starts to feel like justification. And that's exactly why this moment hit so hard. Because for a lot of fans, this wasn't just tone deaf, it felt deeply uncomfortable. Like something personal and painful was being used to support a decision that, at its core, is about lifestyle and image. And that's where Maddie Brown Brush's reaction becomes even more understandable. Because from her perspective, this isn't just about disagreement, it's about boundaries. About what should and shouldn't be part of a public narrative. When someone you love becomes part of a storyline in a way that doesn't feel authentic, it can hit differently. Especially when there's already unresolved tension underneath everything. And that's what makes this situation so layered. On one hand, you have Cody presenting himself as a father trying to move forward, trying to create something meaningful after loss. But on the other hand, you have family members who see that same situation completely differently, who feel like the story being told doesn't reflect the reality they experienced. And when those two perspectives collide, it creates a kind of emotional disconnect that's impossible to ignore. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about a house. It's about trust, memory, and how stories are told, especially when they involve people who are no longer here to speak for themselves. And once that line gets blurred, it's very hard to separate what's real from what's being presented. Now at this point, it's not just tension, it's a full emotional explosion. Because everything Cody Brown has been saying publicly is now being directly challenged by the people who actually lived through it. And leading that charge? Maddie Brown Brush. And if you know Maddie, you already know, she's not someone who speaks just to make noise. When she says something, it usually comes from a place of experience, not impulse. That's why this moment feels so powerful. Because Maddie isn't just reacting to one episode or one comment. She's responding to years of built-up frustration. Years of watching one version of her family being presented publicly, while living a completely different reality behind the scenes. And to really understand why this matters, you have to look at her journey. Maddie grew up right in the center of this family dynamic. She saw everything from the early days of unity to the slow unraveling of relationships. She witnessed how decisions were made, how priorities shifted, and how certain voices started to matter more than others. And for a long time, she stayed relatively quiet about it. But that silence? It doesn't last forever. Especially when the gap between truth and narrative keeps getting wider. What makes this even more emotional is the history she shares with her father. There was a time when Maddie had a strong relationship with Cody. A time when there was respect, connection, and a sense of stability. But over the years, that connection changed. And not overnight. It happened gradually, through moments that may not have seemed huge individually, but added up over time. Missed connections. Misunderstandings. Choices that created distance instead of closeness. And when you stack enough of those moments together, something shifts. That's what we're seeing now. This isn't just anger, it's clarity. Maddie has reached a point where she's no longer trying to protect the image of the family at the expense of her own experience. She's choosing honesty, even if it's uncomfortable. And honestly, that takes courage. Because speaking out against a public narrative, especially one tied to a long-running show like Sister Wives, comes with consequences. It invites attention, criticism, and scrutiny. But despite that, she's still choosing to speak. And that tells you everything you need to know about how strongly she feels. At the same time, Cody seems to be moving in the opposite direction, leaning more into the idea of controlling how the story is told. Trying to present a version of events that focuses on hope, rebuilding, and fresh starts. But the problem is, when the people in that story start telling a different version, it becomes harder and harder to maintain that image. Because now, it's not just viewers questioning things, it's family. And when family starts speaking out, the narrative doesn't just crack. It starts to break. Now this is where things take an even deeper turn, because Maddie Brown-Brush didn't just speak out emotionally. She started revealing something much more personal, her healing process. And honestly, this part changed the tone of everything. Because in the middle of all the frustration, all the tension, and all the public callouts, Maddie gave a glimpse into what she's been doing behind the scenes to actually move forward. During a Q&A, someone asked her a simple but important question, whether she had ever tried therapy to deal with everything involving Cody Brown and the family dynamics. And instead of avoiding it or giving a vague answer, she said yes. Straightforward. Honest. No hesitation. She shared that she's been working with a professional on and off, depending on her schedule, and that it's actually helped her a lot. And that right there is a big moment, because it shows that she's not just reacting emotionally, she's actively trying to heal. That's a huge difference. Because anyone can speak out in anger. But taking the time to process things, to understand them, and to work through them, that takes effort. That takes intention. And it also explains why her words feel so grounded. She's not just venting, she's speaking from a place of reflection. Maddie even went a step further and pointed out something that resonated with a lot of people watching. She said that anyone who comes from a complicated family background could benefit from therapy. And honestly, she's not wrong. Because while the Brown family situation might be more public and more extreme due to sister wives, the core issues, miscommunication, emotional distance, unresolved conflict, those exist in so many families. That's why this moment connected with viewers on a deeper level. It stopped being just about reality TV drama and started becoming something more relatable. Something real. And then, in true Maddie fashion, she added a bit of humor to it, saying that the world might actually be a better place if more people took mental health seriously and got the support they needed. But even in that light tone, the message was clear. Healing matters. Growth matters. And most importantly, taking responsibility for your own emotional well-being matters. Which brings us right back to the contrast that's been building this entire time. On one side, you have Maddie doing the work, reflecting, growing, and speaking from a place of clarity. On the other side, you have Cody talking about fresh starts, new beginnings, and rebuilding relationships, but without really showing what that work looks like behind the scenes. And that's the difference people are starting to notice more than ever. Because at the end of the day, words can only go so far. What really matters is action. And right now, the actions and the effort seem to be coming from very different directions. Now, let's get to the part that's been simmering under the surface for years, the moment when Madison really draws the line with Robyn Brown. Because this isn't just about her dad, Cody Brown, anymore. This is about recognizing patterns of manipulation and control that have defined the last decade of her life. When asked if she would ever reconcile with Cody, Madison didn't dodge the question. She was brutally honest. She said she's not sure because she needs more than he can give. She isn't closing the door out of bitterness or anger, she's closing it out of clarity. She knows that opening it again without real change would only invite the same chaos and disappointment that's defined her childhood and teenage years. And then came the real bombshell, the question about Robyn. Has she tried reaching out? Madison's answer? Simple, direct, unforgiving. Robyn is a liar. The end. Boom. Just like that. No theatrics, no sugarcoating, no vague reality TV diplomacy. That wasn't a clapback. That was a verdict. Madison wasn't just calling out dishonesty, she was defining a boundary. She was saying that manipulation, control, and calculated deception are no longer welcome in her life. The significance of this can't be overstated. This is a daughter speaking from experience, someone who has lived with the consequences of these dynamics. Every subtle slight, every gaslighting moment, every time she was told she was wrong for noticing the truth, all of that culminated in this statement. And it's powerful because it's clear, it's final, and it's unshakable. And this is where the audience starts to see the stark contrast. On one side, there's Cody and Robyn, presenting carefully scripted family-first narratives, selling fresh starts, new homes, and reconciliations. On the other side, there's Madison, who grew up inside that story, watching it unfold and now refusing to play along with the facade. Then there's the shift she describes in understanding her dad and Robyn. She says it started in 2020 when she began reading parenting books and analyzing what healthy relationships and empathy actually looked like. That was the turning point. Not a sudden realization, but a deliberate, methodical understanding of the patterns she had lived through. That one word she used to describe her old relationship with Robyn? Rocky. Just one word, and it carried years of accumulated emotional distance, frustration, and disappointment. This part of Madison's story is critical because it frames the next layer of truth. She didn't just wake up one day and decide Cody and Robyn were selfish. She studied it, she learned, and she recognized it. She observed the difference between what healthy family dynamics should be and what she actually experienced. And once she did, the clarity was unavoidable. Finally, Madison ends with a note that hits like a mic drop. She says, "Dearest gentle viewer, do not let yourself fall victim to any of the nonsense that comes out of Cody and Robyn's mouths. No venom. No theatrics. Just honesty. Just clarity. She's not there to destroy an image. They've done that themselves over the years. She's there to illuminate the truth. And in doing so, she forces everyone, fans, viewers, and the Brown family alike, to confront the reality, the scripted reconciliations, the manufactured empathy, the fresh starts on TLC. They're not grounded in accountability. They're grounded in optics. Madison has spoken. And now the story can't be untold. Her words are final. Her boundaries are clear. And for Cody and Robyn, that's the harshest reality of all. And now we arrive at the final chapter in this long, emotional saga, the fallout that even TLC couldn't fully script or contain. This is where the consequences of years of deceit, manipulation, and favoritism finally collide with reality, and where Madison's voice isn't just heard, it reverberates through the Brown family legacy. After Madison's scathing comments, the ripple effects were immediate. Fans and followers quickly began piecing together the inconsistencies in Cody and Robyn's narrative, comparing Madison's first-hand account with the glossy, polished footage that made it to air. And here's the thing, the contrast is staggering. On one hand, you see Cody and Robyn playing the caring, harmonious family. On the other, you have a daughter, living proof, calling out every calculated smile, every staged hug, and every carefully worded apology that never carried real accountability. What's most striking in this final part of Madison's story is her resolve. She isn't just reacting to a bad childhood or frustrated emotions. She's outlining a blueprint for independence, integrity, and emotional survival. She's the living embodiment of what happens when someone refuses to accept manipulation as the status quo. And the truth hits harder because she's not yelling, not crying, not seeking revenge. She's simply stating facts. And that, in itself, is devastating for the people who built their lives on controlling perception rather than reality. Madison also touches on the long-term implications for her siblings. She warns them not with anger, but with clarity about repeating the same patterns. She emphasizes observation, critical thinking, and standing up for oneself. That's the real lesson here. The cycle of favoritism, financial control, and emotional manipulation isn't just family drama for TV. It's a pattern that can quietly erode lives if left unchecked. And by speaking out, Madison is breaking that pattern, even if it leaves her parents and the public unsettled. Then there's the blowback within the family. Robyn, always meticulous in controlling narratives, is now facing resistance she can't manage. Cody, meanwhile, seems increasingly unmoored. His attempts at reconciliation feel performative, almost desperate, because the truth isn't something you can stage for the camera. This is the reality that fans rarely see, that behind the cameras, the family is fractured, and the damage isn't just emotional, it's structural. What Madison's final words make clear is that the Brown family's story isn't just about love, polygamy, or reality TV spectacle. It's about accountability. And accountability has a voice now that cannot be silenced. Madison, Christine, Janelle, and even Mary in their own ways are showing that the days of blind loyalty and unquestioned authority are over. The narrative is shifting, and the people who tried to control it are losing grip. In the end, Madison's message is both a warning and a promise. See the truth, value yourself, and never let manipulation dictate your life. And as the credits metaphorically roll on this chapter, one thing is clear: Cody and Robyn's carefully curated reality may look intact on screen, but the cracks are visible, deep, and irreversible. The story isn't over, it's evolving. But Madison has ensured that truth, integrity, and accountability are now center stage. And for the Brown family, for TLC, and for the viewers who have followed this journey for years, that final act is nothing short of revolutionary. Her voice is loud. Her boundaries are set. And the echoes of her words will resonate far beyond the cameras. This is the conclusion we've all been waiting for, the moment when the facade finally meets reality.